once again to the NYC Workforce Drop. I'm Greg Morris, CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. This is our first two-parter. This is part two of our conversation with Aldrin Bonilla, the Executive Vice President of the Fund for the City of New York. And I wanted to dig into this part two because we want to make sure we had very focused time today to talk specifically about the report coming from the Fund for the City of New York, overlooked and undercounted in New York City. This is a brief on the income adequacy and the true cost of living. Aldrin is going to dig into this report. Aldrin's focus on data and metrics comes across in our podcasts, and his desire and interest to tell the story of how it is that we know New Yorkers are not finding pathways to self-sufficiency, where it is, who it is, and why it is that that's happening, and the efforts and the recommendations we might have to be able to address that is part of this particular conversation. And I should just note, we are at a time when what the Fund for the City of New York and the NYC True Cost of Living brief, that coming out. There are other briefs and other communications coming out now about the true cost of living. There is the National True Cost of Living report, measuring the true cost of economic security. United Way of New York has what's called the ALICE. That's the Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed report. There are a variety of different reports that are telling the story about how it is that New Yorkers are struggling to make ends meet. And each one has a different way of thinking about that. And this podcast is about how it is that the NYC True Cost of Living brief was created and what it's looking at and what it's thinking about. And Aldrin will say a few words about why it is that he thinks this is the right way to count. I want you to be aware I'm interested in two things. One, I'm interested in us listening to and hearing from everyone who's got a report on the table about what economic security really means. And I was in a convening not too long ago with our friends in philanthropy, looking at the different ways these counts are being measured as our friends in philanthropy think about the next iteration of how they want to fund workforce development for the sake of getting folks to not just low-wage jobs, but middle-wage jobs and beyond. And the starting point has to be, how far are people from where we need them to be? And that's the way to figure out what the right infusions of support might look like to get to where we want to be for self-sufficiency, for financial independence, for economic mobility. I say all this to say, if we're going to have a conversation about affordability, if we're going to have a conversation about how far folks are from where they need to be able to not just get by, but to succeed, it's important for us to think about how the data works and how it's measured. And also, we may ultimately disagree the best way to count it. But at the end of the day, the focus has to be on doing better. And I hope by virtue of the way in which Aldrin shares with you a little bit of the background, a little bit of the story as to how this brief was constructed and what he's focused on, that you're able to take from that something that is both probably concerning, hopeful, inspiring, challenging, but frustrating, but also hopefully putting you on a path to wanting to do something about the cost of living. And I look forward to having the folks from United Way talk about the ALICE report. And we've had in other podcasts the National True Cost of Living conversation. I think there's a lot we can do about the way in which we talk about these numbers. But overall, at the end of the day, we can't catch ourselves in the space of bumping against each other to figure out how to get it just right. We have to be able to figure out how we take the steps towards making this a city that everyone can find their home, their comfort, and their success. This pod is a little bit about how it is that the Fund for the City of New York, in its overlooked and undercounted New York City report, is thinking about that. More to come. Pivot now to your time now at the Fund for the City of New York, and this brief, overlooked and undercounted in New York City 2026, based on the Fund for the City of New York's work on the true cost of living benchmark.
Yes.
This is the updated brief. There'll be a full report that's going to come out, as you said earlier, in April. This is about why income adequacy matters in New York City. We talk about affordability a lot in New York City. That's become a where economic mobility pops up. Your thoughts about how it is that you have committed and your colleagues have thought about how to lift a community up. You know, it's not like it's one part. It's multi-generational. There's educational aspects. There's workforce aspects. There's the social aspects that have to be supported. But brass tacks, we're in a moment where just the headline, 46% of working age New York City households fall below the true cost of living. So the starting point is to say, what is it that you want folks to know about this brief? Because it's in, you know, the full report's going to come out. Again, what do you want the takeaway to be? And then I think the follow-up is going to be, you know, if this is the greatest city in the world, what has to change?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that, because, you know, first of all, I want to be really upfront and transparent about this. The true cost of living measure is based on a self-sufficiency standards framework. Mm-hmm. And the reason why that's important is because we are advocating, right? We want the city to adopt this as its official true cost of living measure, which the voters in 2022 voted overwhelmingly at 81% that they wanted a true cost of living measure. The language that the voters voted on in the ballot measure was they wanted a measure to measure the true cost of living data or indicator to encompass housing, rents, childcare, food, utilities, healthcare, miscellaneous, and taxes. Transportation without private or public assistance. Right, that's what the language of the voters voted on. Turns out that's the exact definition of the self-sufficiency standard. Mm-hmm, right, mm-hmm. I know that Jennifer Jones Austin, amazing leader, amazing
been on the
person.
Podcast, been on the pod.
She is advocating for a different type of measure from Urban Institute. I know Grace Bonilla, phenomenal leader as well.
Also on the pod, we've had all the pod.
She has kind of a favor to a measure called Alice. Mm-hmm, I want to be unequivocal and transparent that this measure, in terms of defined language, is the exact language that was on the ballot.
So following the voice of the voter here, you're making that particular
I believe the city very much needs to consider this.
And again, this is simply and again, this is an important sort of piece of the puzzle, which is to say there are different interpretations, there are different ways of thinking about data in related to self-sufficiency and true cost of living. Mm-hmm. It's going to be critically important that we look at those. I've been lucky enough to be in a couple rooms recently with philanthropy talking about middle wage careers where they were taking different versions of the data. Regardless of which one you pick, this city is facing some significant challenges. I just want everyone to be aware, dig into all the different ways of reporting and reaction. Your starting point is to say, this is what lines with what the voters talked about, and that's what you're digging into.
Yeah, and this measure has 30 years worth of history, so you can measure it across time longitudinally. That's a very beautiful feature of a data, of a statistic. So it's comparable across time. It's transparent and replicable in terms of the public data sources that it uses, in terms of definitions.
And the benefit of that is that you can look back at it over time and reflect on it.
It's not opaque. People know the definition of the data, where to get it, the source, and they could recreate the study if they wanted themselves. It's very granular. It allows you to dig deep into over 290 different household types about what living in New York City's true cost is for you. Mm-hmm. So a household of 4 with 2 working parents, a preschooler, and a school-age child has a different cost profile than a single parent with a infant and a teenager who lives in Long Island City versus someone who lives in the South Bronx. Mm-hmm. So 290 plus different household composition types. That's how granular it gets. Mm-hmm. And it also allows you to then cross-map the statistics and the data points and the profile realities of income inadequacy with policy recommendations, policy prescriptions, which is very much a key decision-making point, I feel, for government and for city bureaucracy and city agencies. So with that said, this measure...
And just to interrupt you for 1 second there to say, and the point of that is saying it's not enough just to have the data. It's not enough just to see what the significance is or how to relate to that. You've got to match that up with...
policy relevance.
There it is.
Yeah,
there
absolutely, absolutely. What are the levers within the parameters and control of city government, elected officials, and civil servants that can move the needle on a variety of different components of this measure, whether housing, whether childcare, whether transportation, whether food, whether health, whether. So that's the idea, right? So it's aligned with that. The big takeaway is that 46% of New York City households, this is a household unit measure, not individuals, not families, household. So 46% of New York City working households between the ages of 18 and 65, 46% of all New York City working age households are below the true cost of living, meaning they have incomes inadequate to meet those various critical, essential, basic needs like housing, like healthcare, like food, like transportation. That 46% is a slight improvement over the study at the height of the pandemic that we did, which was 50% of households. But here's the kicker.
At the height of the pandemic.
At the height of the pandemic. So here's the kicker. 50% of all New York City households in 2022 at the height of the pandemic had difficulty making ends meet in New York City. Now it's 46%. That modest 4% is almost like a mechanical artifact or a systemic artifact because, one, we have less families, less households in New York City with children. It's down 1.2%. So households with children are down 1.2%. Either one, less folks are having children, or two, families or households with children are moving out. Either scenario is not something that a healthy city or a healthy polity wants as a policy outcome, that our policies are either leading to families or households with less children or families and households having the need to move out.
That's right.
So that's what's happening. So that's a mechanical decrease in that. So that's important to know. Number two is that from the height of the pandemic till now, the job market and the labor market recovery has occurred, right? During the pandemic, employment and the economic activity was seized, slowed down, or stopped completely in certain sectors, retail, hospitals, tourism. That's bounced back, but it's bounced back unevenly.
That's right.
And that's what we show here as well. So in terms of what we show here, in terms of the distribution, the households most likely to have income inadequacy or the inability to make the true cost of living in New York City are single mothers. So households headed by single mothers with children. So mothers with children. Highest, 86% fall under the true cost of living measure. Now, the true cost of living, the federal government's poverty measure in New York City is 15%. The poverty measure is so antiquated. It's a 1950s relic where it takes a basket of goods, because at the time in the 1950s, believe it or not, goods and food and things that was more expensive than rent.
That's right.
In the 1950s. So a basket of goods and they multiply it by 3. 2026 is not 1950. So now that's a wholly insufficient measure. But that 15% is what the federal government thinks the poverty profile in New York City is. We're at 46% in terms of what we feel is people with not enough income to make ends meet. That difference between 15 and 46, that like 31 difference is what we say is people that are overlooked and undercounted. Folks that think, what the hell? No policy, no city regulation, no city program, no city benefit says that I'm eligible for it, or that I'm making too much. How am I making too much when I can't even make ends meet? That population is very important that we don't lose. That's the population under crunch. That's the population that we need in our workforce, and that's the single mothers with children population. Then even married with children is around still 49, 50% cannot make ends meet. So that's in terms of that profile. In terms of race and ethnicity, 62% of Latin or Latino, Latinx households face income inadequacy, cannot make the true cost of living. And part of that mostly is driven by the Bronx, which I'll talk about further on. This New York City cannot move any needle, statistically speaking, on any indicator, out-of-school youth, asthma rates, poverty, employment, graduation rates, cannot move any needle that's of merit, of worth, or meaning in New York City without targeting surgically the Bronx. That's like the anchor of a lot of these different data points. So Latin 62% cannot make ends meet. For the black community, is 60%. both percentages are just down moderately from like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So in terms of geographies, well, the report also importantly says, which I know you know and your sector knows far too well, is that this is not a question of employment or jobs.
That's right.
Because 80% of the households that fall under the true cost of living have one or more workers in that household.
Yeah, this is the part that's agonizing that I read, which says, while households without workers face the highest risk of income inadequacy, the majority of households struggling to meet basic needs in New York City include one or more working adults, reflecting the high cost of housing and childcare relative to wages.
Absolutely.
So
about 84%.
if you're in the business of job training, you're in the business of career advancement, you're in the business of thinking about how to get New Yorkers into the right industries to be able to live, well, having a job just isn't going to answer that question or isn't going to solve that. So it is about wages. And the other note here is striking. The median annual shortfall among households below the true cost of living, because you go, okay, well, they're below, but how below can it be? The number here is the median average is $46,000.
That's right. Absolutely right.
I mean, that's massive.
And net, not gross. That's the beauty of this number. This net is net. This is not about what your salary should be. This is what you should have at the end to make ends meet.
That's right. Just to make ends meet.
Just to make ends meet. And the medium, the problem with some data analysis in New York City that we always have to be mindful of is that New York City is notoriously segregated. And there's notorious income inequality and disparity across boroughs and within boroughs. And that skews numbers a great deal. Right. So that 46, 50,000 additional net needed as a medium, in some communities it means 80, 90,000. In others it means like 30. So that's, in terms of geographic variation, here's very interesting. At the height, let's take, for example, financial district in Greenwich Village. When we did our previous study at the height of the pandemic, about 26% of people in Greenwich Village, financial district, had income inadequacy during the pandemic, right? So that's pretty alarming. Like 1 in 4.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, what's going? Height of the pandemic. However, they were in employment and in jobs that continued paying them, that continued to be, the financial sector and others. That marks that. 3 years later, that's down to 14%. So in Greenwich Village, in the West, in Greenwich Village and financial district, during the pandemic, the worst moment in a century of our economy, in our city, in terms of employment, in terms of dislocation, in terms of displacement, the worst was 26%, which still made them the best in the whole city.
Yeah.
Now, 3 years later, only down to 14%. So that's a drastic drop. In the Bronx, where you experience the highest level income inadequacy, the Bronx might be more affordable, but people have less money to even afford the quote-unquote more affordable. 80%. 80%. Right? During the height of the pandemic, it was 76%. Things have gotten worse. So while in places where standard of living is higher, rents are higher, childcare is higher, some of the food costs might be higher, people have the money to make ends meet there. And increasingly so in the last 3 years. The rebound, the jobs, the salaries, the hike in those places of Greenwich Village, phenomenal. Increased by 11%, 12%. In the Bronx, it actually worsened. Shows you the uneven distribution of the rebound. So there has been, where people want to go back to, normal or new normal, whether it's the normal, the new normal is some of the same old story, if not worse, for many communities throughout New York City, particularly in the Bronx, but not limited to the Bronx.
And on that note, too, I think we could say that that bounce back in some cases in terms of opportunity, the neighborhoods, the communities, the demographics that have access to opportunity, speeding up the bounce back. Generational wealth plays a role in that as well. And then the pockets of New York and the individuals in New York and the communities in New York that have been hit harder. I would just suggest, and I wonder what you think about that, it probably is not surprising. In other words, if we think about where in New York City the city has done well versus where it hasn't, if you rewind the clock back to the 70s and 80s, it might not be terribly different.
Yeah, a lot of overlap.
right?
Absolutely, a lot of overlap.
And that says a lot about both where I guess we have made investments. It says something about how far it is we've come versus how far it is we have to go as we deal with the continued exponential costs that people have to think about in this moment.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah. If you look, but for gentrification nuances, the map somewhat. But if you overlay the pockets of despair and the pockets of income inadequacy with redlining maps from the 1950s, you're absolutely right. There will be a lot of similarities.
You'd see the same thing.
Absolutely.
There's again, and this goes back to the earlier point that was made. We shared about. Systemically, institutionally, there were pockets and ways in which things were constructed so that some people benefited and some people didn't. And we're seeing the doubling down on that in a moment where the city's costs have only risen. And some folks seem to have found a footing or are less worried about finding their footing, and others continue to suffer. The idea that folks are doing worse than they were during the pandemic is particularly startling. And it's something that we have to reflect on as we get ready for, and as it's starting to happen right now, the work requirements related to SNAP. Who that's going to hit. When the Medicaid changes roll out after that, which are massive, we're going to make some of those basic needs even harder to access or get closer to.
Absolutely.
And that's just a brutal
increasing transportation costs.
Absolutely.
So we have a measure, right, that takes into account the essential expenses and components. And we have this measure over time. We have it at the granular level, household type, household composition. It shows that work alone is not enough. 80%, 84% are households with one or more workers. It shows that the rebound since the pandemic, the most difficult disruption we've had in over a century, the rebound has not been equally felt and evenly distributed. In fact, you have places in the Bronx who have 80% income inadequacy. 80% of the households there have difficulty making ends meet. And whereas the neighborhood with the least income inadequacy is someplace that's high expense, high cost, like Greenwich Village, the financial district that shows that immense wealth, immense income. And while it's the most expensive, there's no income inadequacy or difficult making ends meet because at the end of the day, they pay their bills and they have a lot left over from those categories. Now, what we say and what we show is the poverty measure in 2026 says that a family of four with a preschooler and a school age should be making about $33,000. That's what the federal government says. That's the official.
That's the Fed. That's the Fed. Yeah.
We say that number is insane because rent alone takes up like $36,000. So you don't even have. And then childcare comes in around $30,000. Childcare has moved to be one of the most, to be the second greatest expense category for families, which is probably part of the driver while families are having less children. This whole double income, no kids, DINK, which is affecting and running its way as a bubble through our city in terms of affecting the building of more studios and one bedrooms instead of 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and family composition households. We got to be careful of that because we're pretty much segmenting that the city won't be a city of families into the future if we're not careful.
That's right.
So what we're saying is in the Bronx, a family of 4 needs minimally $125,000 net, not gross, net.
2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child.
And then you got places like in South Manhattan, which that number is $167,000 at the high end. So this is net, right? This is money that you need, not in terms of pre-taxes, none of that.
That's right.
And that's important because there's some other measures that might have a taller amount, but that they're saying a full salary thing. This is about income independence, no public or private assistance, just the money, the cash in hand that you need to make ends meet. Now, we know that several interesting things happen here. I mentioned the Bronx. Why the Bronx concerns me so much is for a variety of reasons. The Bronx is a place that is often heralded as like your last resort, the last bastion of affordability, the last place where if you get the place from Upper Manhattan, you go over the High Bridge and you get to the Bronx and you land there. If you get this place from Brooklyn or Queens, you land in the Bronx, right? But what happens if the place of last resort and the place with the largest concentration of workers that the downtown corporations and companies and different firms need, what happens that if that's the same spot that people are leaving, So there's a flood of people of displacement of households that are deciding to move to Yonkers, to Pennsylvania, to North Carolina, even to Florida, right? Because the cost of living has become too expensive for them to make ends meet in the most affordable borough.
Right.
That's a formula for disaster. In terms of the workforce needs of the city, in terms of the vitality and economic rebound that we need for the city, and in terms of the depopulation of New York City. More people are living in the Bronx and in pockets of Brooklyn at a higher rate from the last 20 census than we've experienced in a while. So we have a net decline in population. While at the same time, there was a little blip, a population increase when we were dealing with the migrant influx. And we were all, people are praying for like more bodies to come into the U.S. either as tourists, particularly New York City, as tourists or immigrants or migrants, because we're at a point right now where even our school system, right, this is going to reverberate, right? Our school system went from like 1.1 million K-12 students to about 860,000. That's going to have dramatic impact and implications going forward. However, in Queens, another area of economic distress, something differently is happening there because they're dealing. A rent in Queens for a family of four for a 2-bedroom went from like $900 in 2000 to now like $3,000 about in 2026. Now, people are saying, well, in Street Easy, Zillow, Realtors, you can't find an apartment for that amount. This is from the HUD numbers in terms of affordable housing where you can find it. So that's why that number sounds even low. But that's like $36,000 just in rent. Add to that,
that's right,
$30,000 in childcare for a family in the South. You're looking now at $65,000,
right,
upwards. So here, though, why families are not moving out as much, and this is going to be really elucidated in the major report, is that here in Queens, something interesting is happening in that you have households with multiple families. People are doubling up and tripling up.
Yeah.
So an answer for 2 or more working people in a household and you still can't make ends meet is that folks are doubling up. At a lesser rate than folks are in the Bronx. So that's an interesting finding as well. This report, we're looking for the full report in April because it will let us dig deeper into what does this mean for 2 families where you have a preschooler, an infant, and a teenager. Because teenagers now are, while the data, we only keep it into 18, but we understand the transition to the workforce for this generation coming out now has not been worse in decades. I mean, these folks are couch surfing. They're living home longer, 25, 30 years of age. Those of you who have teenagers in your household, you know that the food costs shoot up tremendously to and maybe offset even what you're not spending in childcare. Not as much. Childcare is the second most biggest driver of expenses. But food costs, as all of you who know who've been either shopping in Costco or BJ's or even ordering out, food costs have escalated way beyond inflation, not triple percent of inflation. And to have a teenager in your household, it's even higher costs in that regard.
And there's a particular pain point here related to our young adults, especially those that are out of school, out of work. Those numbers, while over the course of the city's recent history, we had made some progress in addressing the out-of-school, out-of-work numbers to help folks find pathways to school and college. That number has hit the upswing again. It was the young adults that got hit hardest during the pandemic, specifically during that period, and are still feeling the reverberations of that. So much so that we can't even, I think we don't even have the most accurate numbers at this point in terms of that young adult pathway, that 18 and up or that 16 to 24 and beyond. Where are they right now and how are they doing? And to your point, folks living at home, folks trying to figure out where they're going to work, the gig economy work, which does not necessarily coincide with health benefits.
Correct.
And having to deal with that is a particular sticking point for our city because generationally, where that group ends up is going to impact us economically, right? So if you've got an outgoing set of New Yorkers, you got a next round of generational folks coming on board who haven't found the foothold, don't have the experience, don't have the opportunities, then where do we look for stability? It may not be here at all at that point. And I think that's where we're at a very interesting moment of reflection as to how it is that we find some sense of balance at a very costly moment where the access and opportunity is less available than it was before. And I guess I'm just wondering, I don't know if there's anything you can clue us in on here before the report is released in terms of what the recommendations would be. What is it that you think the city could or should be doing? Because we can continue to have a conversation just about what are the right data sources to look at, what the numbers are. It's not going to be pretty no matter what we do, but we're always going to have to come back to what you said, which is we've got to have our elected officials, we've got to have a shared sense of what collective action looks like to solve where we are right now. Childcare, obviously a very hot topic in this particular moment, and how that might get paid for in different ways by this new mayoral administration, how the governor wants to work with this administration to figure that out. Are there things that you are teeing up that you can share now about how we get to solutions?
Yeah. What I can share is that, right, the levers, you have the levers only on two sides of the equation. One side of the equation is the income and the wages, right? And then the other side of the equation is the different buckets we mentioned. What can you do around rent in terms of what's driving the cost there, what can lower the cost there? What can you do around childcare, which the two-care and some of the policies that the cities, it's no coincidence that the new mayoral administration ran on an affordability agenda, and it resonated so vividly across all 5 boroughs. The lever around transportation in terms of in a variety of ways. I want to go back to the Bronx. Now, transportation is a lot of levers in terms of fair fares and different policies that we can advocate for. But in the Bronx, in particular, with the transportation deserts and with the a design to just get everybody from the Bronx to the downtown workplaces, not knowing that the east to west connectivity in the Bronx through buses takes forever, hours, and it's really diminishing the economic opportunities and growth from east to west development, economic development in the Bronx.
That's
right. That needs a regional perspective to it.
That's right.
The idea of food and the increasing costs of food as well, when you look at food deserts and when you look at the increases in terms of the delivery of food and those kind of additional costs that are added on to some of the app-based products is problematic. So when you look at healthcare, right, in terms of and when you look at utilities, a lot of the drivers too that make the official poverty measure even more so antiquated is that it doesn't really take into account the increased phone bills in terms of cell phones, in terms of internet connection, in terms of different things that we actually need
heating costs,
to survive. So the utilities aspect of that in terms of what we can do. One thing that in terms of calibrating this that we know is that, number one, in terms of people getting paid more, right? I know there's the 30 by 2030, right? There's different things that we can get on board with, right? We have to get on board with it in a way that still has an economist lens to it. What we don't want, for example, is that we won't want folks to get paid more, and then what they're paying for increases and escalates at a higher percentage and rate than what they're getting paid. And that kind of thing insidiously often offsets the kind of gains we want. For example, we have a great deal of subsidies and aid to go to college, right? What we don't want is the more subsidies, the more aid, the more that the federal, state, and local kick into that kitty in terms of reducing the obligation on the families for college, that it gets offset by just the increase at the same rate or greater on the tuition side. Because it erases any gains that you may get. So we have to be very conscious, deliberate, and intentional about that. That leading corporations, others know that this is not an inflationary type thing, which is the first thing that people go to, right? The increases on the part of the equation, income and wages, have to be real, and they have to outpace the kind of income, because we're already behind by inflationary pressures that have been compounded over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, where wages haven't kept up to. And even to the extent that they might have matched, like through some cost of living increases that might have been pegged to inflation, it never really is, because things fluctuate seasonally. Look what we're doing now with gas prices and things of that sort. So it hurts families
Yeah.
on a seasonal basis. So the part of the recommendations will be sensitive to that. The kind of gains on the income wage side have to then be intentionally combined with making sure that the cost side of it is not increased, right? How do we do that? It's very difficult, right? It's it's a contested, adaptive challenge.
Yeah.
We have to understand that the idea of freezing the rent, right, is one way, but that also hurts certain people that are below the true cost of living as well.
Right.
In terms of childcare, while we want to expand childcare, we have to be mindful that the people taking care of our children are also under the true cost of living.
That's
and
right.
not being paid adequately, and are the drivers of the 62% Latina women, 60% African American women that are not just in the childcare space, but in the elder care, home health aid space.
Exactly.
So that's really the balancing act that has to be intentional. Whereas you're paying people more and you're trying to keep the cost down, the costs being kept down have to be targeted and surgical.
That's right.
As a way to not then cause inflationary harm.
And this is going to put us in a position to have to do some things that, fair to say, are not easy to do. Surgical precision from a political will perspective is very hard. It's never been easy, let's assume, but it seems particularly difficult now because we sort of exist in a world where if compromise doesn't always seem like something that's treasured or respected. It's as if it's all or nothing in some cases. And sometimes that is both a brutal consequence, and sometimes that is something we need to stand up perhaps and cheer for. But the reality is if we're in an all or nothing kind of space, it's probably going to make it more likely that we do nothing. And that doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, no. Doing nothing at this moment, given the high percentages of people who simply cannot make ends meet. And these are essential expenses.
Yeah.
These families perennially, daily, weekly, have to lament not being able to go to a sporting event or a concert or even a play. Enjoying
the magic of the city that exists beyond.
The city is far from meeting its historic center of opportunity, center of possibility, center of work and play and excitement and enjoyment, everything that the city offers. Potentially after you've already done your 12-hour shift or double jobs, or so. But in terms of back to the recommendation solutions, in terms of surgical and precision, within the tax code is a nice way to be surgical with the increased tax credits, childcare tax credits, and others. That's one way. Another way is in terms of what you mentioned. Is interestingly enough a way in terms of the benchmarking work that you're doing, because we really we're going right now into a $129 billion budget, if I'm not mistaken. $129 billion. I think my last year working with Dinkins and stuff, I think the budget was 35 billion. And, people I'm an old person, so I'm the old man in the sea. But I don't think that, in terms of whether it's the fire department, the police, I don't think that people really feel in New York City as a whole that we have gotten the differential 90 plus billion more. I don't think we feel 90 billion
Are our lives collectively 90 billion happier or more successful?
Yeah. Or even, better served. Yeah. I think if you ask New Yorkers who've been here in the 80s and 90s.
What would they say?
I don't think they would say that. And in certain regards, but in terms of opportunity, in terms of employment prospects, because remember, a lot of what's chipping away at this is the two drivers of housing and childcare. Right. Which before, before the housing, the rents, a family and factory work of two can pay the rent and still send their child to Catholic school. Yeah. And still,
which was huge for lots of families.
Yeah, and then so that's the real challenge, and opportunity, that where benchmarking comes in helpful in terms of cost per unit and different things. That it's a $129 billion budget. I think the fifth largest from state or cities in the whole country. We should be able to get this right.
And the Independent Budget Office, shout out to Louisa Chafian, Independent Budget Office, has done some work to talk about how much of that budget is actually money that can be moved in different directions to address different priorities, and how much is built-in expenses that the city has to pay, and how that's grown exponentially over time. Here's my final two thoughts for you. I'm curious. Listen, you're a generous, no doubt, loving, doting father. What do you say to your kids about the city now and the city they're growing up in? Yeah.
Everything I've just said goes out the window when it comes to my own children, I guess, because, it's generationally is a different world, right? Mm-hmm. My son is 14. Mm-hmm. My daughter's 9. They grew up as digital natives, for good, bad, or indifferent. I'm beginning to think more, especially yesterday with the verdict against Meta and all that this has been one great, nasty experiment done on us in terms of our children and how the algorithms have gripped their brains around.
Targeted in the most vulnerable spaces where your brain is not fully developed yet. You got hit the hardest.
Yeah. So it's going to be a challenge for them. I'm most worried about the population you mentioned earlier, which is the population that now, which hit the pandemic. Well, the recession before the pandemic, right? They were in high school, then hit the pandemic right after college, and hit an economy with disruptions and displacements and downsizing and or right sizing, as some would say, with different type of skill sets, and that are now 24, 25, 26, 27. And in previous generations would have been at the precipice of possibly purchasing their first co-op or single family starter home, would have been on about 4, 5, 6 years into a defined or pension plan or a defined contribution pension plan, and who would have been well on their way to professional careers with promotion and salary scales, and which have none of the three. And at their prime working years where our city needs the most and they can decide to either be here or not. So I think that is an area of workforce development and of serious concern. That population now, 24, maybe even pushing on 30, who have not found their way into career prospects or something of many of them are doing the gig economy stuff. And here and there, that's kind of like making some ends meet, but they are all at full category, fall under the true cost of living standard of making ends meet. And if they have any disposable income, it's just completely as a result that the category of rent is probably only because they're living with their parents or grandparents. Or doubling up with roommates.
That's right. And I was on a panel earlier today, another report that we will talk about in the future about how careers are stalling, and how it is that there are pauses sort of in the growth and development of a lot of career spaces, so that at a certain point I've hit a place where how is it that I can actually earn more money in this particular salary? And we were talking about that, and someone asked, I think it was the moderator, sort of said, how do we know this was going to happen? What were the early warning signs, that this would be a concern? And I just kind of jumped in and said, well, in our city, if you focus on public funding, and again, we recognize that public funding may have guardrails around it in terms of what it can be used for, what it can't. But if we're talking about public funding specific to job training, largely in the city, that money has gone towards young adults. It hasn't gone to adults. And that is not to undercut the investment in young adults. It's simply to say young adults become adults. And young adults need significant investment to be able to find their footing in different industries, career opportunities, depending on what neighborhood or specific vulnerabilities they might have, the investments we have to make to get them onto good career ramps. But you know what? They all become adults. And the number of college stopouts we have in this city, folks who stepped away from the college process for any number of reasons, with credits in their back pocket, not finished, and also
debt too sometimes
huge
degree in debt.
That's right, and also the number of folks who talk about in particular folks of color who talk about they have their degree and they can't find a foothold into the job market, or they can't find the type of job that should relate to their particular degree and what that means. We've talked about that on the podcast too, but I just kind of want to note this idea of if there are warning signs, right, they've been around for a while. The pandemic pulled the curtain back
Absolutely.
On lots of things.
And exacerbated.
And exacerbated it at the same time. And I think those of us who are in this space, and I, again, trust and appreciate your judgment in so many different ways, that you are elevating and focused on the true cost of living, that you are invested in thinking about the census and have had that history focused on the census and how you thought about not just supporting the individuals to do their job, but how it is that you created a great working environment for them to do that. We have a census coming up again, by the way, and we'll have to dig into that. How the fund itself.
Worried about that one.
Yeah, and we should be. And how the fund itself, the fund for the city of New York itself, is committed to supporting project partners like NYC, ETC, and engaged in so many different ways to support the stability and welfare of so many New Yorkers. I just have to sort of say, like, we know the warning signs. Trust the judgment of the folks who are saying there are issues here. Don't take shortcuts just in saying what affordability is or isn't. We have to dig into why it matters. And we're going to have to make some hard choices that may not satisfy everybody about trying to move the needles in different ways.
And we have to target and be surgical around moving the needle. I mentioned home health aides. I mentioned childcare workers. Yep. As another, I'm the chair and commissioner of the Equal Employment Practices Commission for the city. The public sector cannot be left off the hook either. A lot of these people under the true cost of living are government employees, city employees.
That's right.
During the pandemic, the biggest exits from city government during the pandemic were black women and Latina women who exited city government during the pandemic. Think childcare, think different challenges. They're going back into the workforce. Unfortunately, some of them are going back after 2 or 3 years, so it means that they can't even go back at their old rank or salary. It's like some arcane rules around that. We need to be mindful of that. We need to be cognizant. We need to keep our eyes on that ball because it's foregone wages, it's career opportunity delays, promotion issues happen there. We got to. Secondly, New York City, most cosmopolitan, I always say we're the smartest in the world, or at least we think so. We're the most segregated residential city. And recent report, as of 2 weeks ago, we have the highest school-based segregation. Not surprisingly, our public sector municipal workforce is highly occupationally segregated. That occupational segregation in New York City's workforce among our civil servants, those who work for DEP versus those who work for Department of Parole, those who work for DYCD versus those who work for DCAS, like that kind of occupational segregation drives pay disparities. That's genderized and racialized in the city of New York. So if you think about tackling true cost of living, income adequacy, and getting us to a place where some of these solutions are, you got to go where the main thing is the main thing and where the main drivers are the main drivers. In the public sector, with 312,000 employees and about 7% vacancies, have a huge opportunity and responsibility to kind of reflect the kind of changes and the kind of gaps that we see in terms of improving them and moving the needle on that. And it starts with our municipal workforce. In terms of adequate payment of the women in the workforce, in terms of not racializing the different occupations within the different agencies, and in terms of dealing with institutional and historic kind of discriminations that have occurred in that sector, driving pay equity. That pay equity then in time will help with wealth equity. When you think of the foregone pensions and retirement dollars that communities have been excluded or underpaid within the city workforce, it's in the tune of billions of dollars uncollected in communities that could have gone to uplift families and communities as a whole, because the public sector has always been that vehicle to middle classness, to incorporating different immigrant groups, and we've failed miserably within the last. At least I've been chairing this committee, and I've seen these patterns for the last 5 years, but these patterns predate that for like about, decades. But we know this to be the case. We have to do something about that aspect of it. The other part of that is, in terms of the municipal workforce, seeing it as a worthy, valuable place for younger generations to want to work
Right.
at like previous ones. And that's kind of diminished over time. Some of that is because of federal government stuff, in terms of tax on the civil service, and public sector workforce and all that. But that's going to be a real problem, because those who are getting the messaging and the narratives that that's not a place that you want to work are still the folks who are underemployed, unemployed, under the true cost of living, which still need employment. So the city has to do a revamp, a facelift, a kind of both marketing and both management and workforce, labor force kind of campaign to attract a younger generation to think that working for the city is something that's valuable, something that you could be proud of, something that will lead to a middle class, upper middle class, and retirement security proposition. Because currently, not a lot of people are thinking that way who are not who are coming up of age in the workforce.
That's right, and I appreciate you sharing that, and I think I would believe that is directly in alignment with an affordability agenda, with
Absolutely.
a focus in this administration thinking about worker rights and economic justice. I think it's also a key part of the conversation, which is about corporate responsibility. You know, it's easy to point the fingers outwards on that, but the city needs to take a hard look at itself. And this administration needs to take a really hard look at the on-ramps to opportunity in the municipal workforce, how it is that you're reskilling or upskilling the workforce, because that is the middle wage engine and has been for a long time. The municipal workforce numbers are down. They haven't bounced back. And it's about a lack of interest, lack of focus. The pay scales are different depending on what agency you're dealing with. And those are things that if there's not a pathway to cleaning that up, we're missing the biggest opportunity for this city probably to stabilize, which is one of the largest corporate workforces. It's the municipal workforce, and that's
Absolutely.
where we need to lean in.
That's where you, and the last point in terms of moving
Yeah,
the needle
yeah, please.
I want to end with the Bronx. Whether you have, you mentioned the corporate sector. Don't want to leave the corporate sector off the hook. I don't even want to leave sovereign wealth funds, whether it's Dubai, anywhere else off the fund. The Bronx needs a Marshall Plan, a $10 billion targeted workforce investment, community upliftment strategy framework program specifically for the Bronx. If you move the Bronx needle on childhood poverty, on graduation rates, on employment, on home ownership, on disconnected youth, just by 5%, it moves the overall needle in New York City by over 25%. You go where the need is greatest, you go where you can make the most difference, you go where you move the needle the fastest and the greatest amount of percentage-wise, the Bronx is that place. So it needs a regional strategy for transportation to get people to where they need to go at a cheaper rate, at a faster speed of time, because right now it takes too long on buses and it's too expensive on Metro North and otherwise. It needs a regional strategy to incorporate the Bronx with Westchester, Yonkers, Jersey, and Connecticut, and it needs a strategy that's surgically focused on the strengthening the infrastructure, social and physical of the Bronx, and also that talent pool, because that is where you're going to get the greatest amount of progress.
Dr. Aldrin Bonilla making the plea, focused, data-focused plea, recommendations clear, invest in the Bronx, make the difference there. It's going to elevate the rest of the city in a number of ways.
All of New York City.
Here's the last thought for you before we wrap up. This has been an honest and true pleasure, and I know we could keep going. We're going to break this up into 2 parts probably because there's so much good stuff I don't want people to miss. My last thought to you is, can you do me a favor? Just describe for me the Valley.
Oh, man. Wow.
Now, this is its own separate podcast.
Yeah, no.
But I'd love a little teaser right now because I've only heard.
You know, Tara Gartner from the association.
Shout out to Tara.
Yeah.
Daycare Council.
Yeah.
Shout out to Tara.
Yeah. Marjorie Parker.
Jobs First, NYC. Jobs First National, soon Jobs First Global, I'm positive. Love Marjorie Parker.
Arva Rice.
Oh my God, Arva Rice. Oh my, these are heavy. These are the heaviest.
Eddie Silverio.
Eddie, that's, and by the way, I know that's your brother.
That's my compadre.
That's your compadre. Yeah, there
Sandino,
it is.
Sandino Sanchez.
Sandino and I work together
right.
at Children's Aid.
Oh,
I love it.
See the names.
Like
I'm
the who.
Legends.
These are literal legends.
All together within a 4 or 5 year period between 86, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88 at the Valley, being both mentored and mentoring others in a youth development program by the great John Best. And Alfonso Wyatt and many others. And it was just a remarkable, a pioneering youth development program in the Manhattan Valley area, Harlem. and phenomenal place to be as a teenager, and as someone who started just going into the workforce and finding themselves. It could be another part, but it was through the Valley that then I spent time at the United Nations working for the African National Congress, which then led me to work with Nelson Mandela in South Africa twice over for a period of 4 months during the transition, being a liaison to the delegation that came from the United States, like Hillary Clinton, Colin Powell, Harry Belafonte, and others, and just a remarkable time in my life where it allowed me to just stretch beyond belief at a global scale. And that was the Valley. They provided high expectations, higher supports, higher networks, and the endless amount of agape love.
Beautiful people doing amazing things together. Aldrin, you've been part of so many wonderful things. You have benefited from, you have offered generously, you have built and continue to build. It is an honor and a privilege, truly, to think of you as a colleague and a friend. And I am so very grateful for all the rooms that we get to share together.
Absolutely.
But more than anything else, I'm grateful that in this moment in our city's history, that I know you, because I know that means that you and a lot of the names you just said are all laser-like focused on trying to figure out what's next that's better than what's ever been.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation. Always enjoy our time together. And we both have a warrior that when we get tired, she'll pick up the rank and start throwing rocks, which is Maria Lizaldo, who
shout out
is
to Maria.
incomparable.
We love her. Wherever you are right now, pause for a minute and say,
shout
out to you, Maria Lizardo.
Alrighty.
Final thought, listen, and this is a promise, we're going to do something just on the Valley here too, because
that'd be amazing.
I think there are just stories
Let me
upon
know.
stories and stories.
I'll get you an all-star lineup.
I know you will.
All-star lineup.
It's all stars all
I
the
just
time.
Found out too that Greg Taylor, I'm not sure if you know.
Oh, I know
Greg
that name. Yeah.
He just became head of Tides Foundation.
Yeah.
He's also a Valley guy. But the list is
amazing. It's amazing. It's so incredible. Thank you for this time, sir. Doctor, it is a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you, Greg.
Best to. Thank you.